Don is setting up a serving of pie today, because who does not love pie? What is your favorite filling for a pie? Coconut cream? Key lime. That's Denise's favorite. Is that the Oakland fan? Okay. I should say the Raiders fan. They're in Vegas, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. There you go, Denise, the sour taste. Yeah, come on up. Anybody else have a favorite? Apple. Traditional pumpkin, blueberry. And I have none of those. Bren, let's see a picture of Bren up there. I don't have there's my clicker, I can do it. There you go. Whoops, did I go too far? Yeah. Bren Newland is a chef in our church. She is excellent, and I asked her this week if she'd make me a gluten-free pie. And she made a gluten-free honey salted, what's that called? I never had it.
Salted honey.
Salted honey. Are you in here, Bren? Bren, you want to come up to the stage? Let us see you. Denise, will you cut us a piece of pie?
I think Bren should cut the pie.
Bren, this is beautiful. Can you see this? All you online people? Isn't that great?
Show them over there.
Oh, y'all can't? I'm not going to let you get too close over here. Hi, Bren. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, probably. Okay.
I am so sorry. I know in kindergarten you're not supposed to eat anything you can't share with the rest of the class. So what ingredients are in a honey? No, tell me again.
Yeah, salted honey pie.
Salted honey. I guess honey and salt.
Honey and salt. I'd used a melted brown butter,
Melted brown butter.
which is one of my favorite baking techniques. And then it's basically a custard pie, but where kind of honey is the star of the show.
Well, I love honey, so this is perfect.
My gluten-free crust is kind
And a gluten-free crust. That's a challenge, isn't it? Gluten-free crust.
There we are.
Would you like to have a bite? Did you try it
I
yet?
have had an entire mini version this morning.
Okay, that was a good breakfast. I can't wait. Thank you, Bran. Give Bran another thank you. My gosh. That's honey, huh? Did anybody have some milk? That would be great with a glass of oat milk. All right. Pie. That's going to be one of my new favorite pies. But how many of y'all have ever had a humble pie? Yeah, we have. How does that taste? Yeah, it is a bitter pie, that's for sure. We think that key lime is sour. Yeah, that is so very true. We've all heard of a humble pie, and the idiom that is humble pie means this: to face humiliation for an error or wrongdoing, something for which we must apologize, often in some public way. According to the word people etymologists, the word humble pie comes from this word, humble pie. Back in the day, an humble pie was filled with all the innards of an animal, a deer, a cow, or a pig. So you take the kidneys, the spleen, all that kind of stuff. It's like our hot dogs are today, I guess. And they just put them in a pie. And it was kind of really a nasty thing. And the word humble comes from the French word numble, which means a deer's innards. And obviously, humble pie was considered inferior food. Like no kidding, of course it would be. But in medieval times, it was the common meal among the lower class individual. And so to eat a humble pie became to mean that whoever was eating that humble pie was being humbled, was being brought down. And we all at some point in our life have had to eat some humble pie. Maybe we haven't eaten it, but we should have eaten it, because we all have done things for which we need to make an apology. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus serves some humble pie. He is observing while people are going to a banquet. He's watching all of these people try to jockey for the best seat in the house, the one closest to the host. And he observed all of these people pushing and shoving, trying to have the seat of honor at this banquet. And he says, those who exalt themselves will eat humble pie. But those who eat humble pie will be exalted. He says it a little bit different. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. We all know someone who fits the first part, for all who exalt themselves. Ted Lasso, we are learning in this series of Ted Lasso, the series on Apple TV, that Ted Lasso fits the second part of that verse. Ted Lasso is a model of modesty, a hero of humility. At his very first press conference with the notoriously feisty British press, he very openly and boldly admits that you could fill 2 internets with what I don't know about football. So the question that I have to ask myself, and maybe you need to ask yourself, am I humble and am I secure enough to admit my weaknesses? Am I humble enough, am I secure enough to admit that I just don't know everything? There's a guy named Tim Urban who's a well-known blogger, and he was quoted by, I think it was Adam Grant in a leadership book. He says, arrogance is ignorance plus conviction. Arrogance is like a rubber shield that we would hold in front of us. And that rubber shield, every time new information hits the rubber shield, it just bounces off. That's arrogance, a rubber shield. New information just bounces off of it. But humility, on the other hand, is like a sponge. Humility absorbs and soaks in the new information. Have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Those 2 guys they're 2 social psychologists, and they released some studies back in 1999. And they discovered that the dumber you are, the smarter you think you are. And so if anybody ever just brags about how smart they are, they're just really showing and saying how dumb they really are. It's very much like the idea that when we lack competence, we're most likely to be brimming full of confidence. It's very much like the armchair quarterback. Ralph decided to take a break from posting his expert opinions on medicine, science, and foreign policy on social media. He's now, as football season is starting, an armchair quarterback. And we have all run into these know-it-alls who think that they are the experts of everything, that only I can do whatever. And be very careful about those kinds of individuals. Yeah. The smarter we say we are reveals that very likely, especially in that one area, we may not be so smart. Ted Lasso's humility allows him, for example, to seek answers, to seek help from anybody, even his kit man or his equipment manager by the name of Nate. Take a look at this particular scene. I think this is from season 1, where Ted Lasso gets some instructions, some advice from the least likely one who would know anything, the equipment manager for the team. Take a look. By the name of Nate. Take a look at this particular scene. I think this is from season 1, where Ted Lasso gets some instructions, some advice from the least likely one who would know anything, the equipment manager for the team. Take a look. writes this in Romans chapter 12, verse 16. And I've got two different versions of it. Never be wise in your own eyes. It kind of rhymes, doesn't it? Make a song out of that one. Do not think how smart you are. Oh, if we could just embrace that philosophy. And one of the values that we do embrace at the venues is intellectual humility. You can see all the values that we embrace, that we've listed, on a wall in the lobby. Hopefully you will see those values lived out in our very lives as a staff. But one of those is intellectual humility. Intellectual humility communicates, I know that I don't know. That's why I never want you to accept what I say without you researching it, without you thinking about it, because I don't know any more than you know. There are so many things I don't know. I love the Socratic method. Socrates, who said, the only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. You know, humble people realize they just don't know everything, and that there's so much, even about a topic that they would be considered by the world to be an expert. They recognize that their knowledge, even about that area, is so very limited. And so a humble person doesn't feel the need to defiantly and to passionately defend their position, because they ultimately know there's so much they don't know, that there's so much left to learn. That doesn't say that a humble person doesn't have values or doesn't have some convictions, but they just don't have the need to hold on to that conviction without considering others, without listening to others, because they recognize they don't know everything. So a person of humility is willing to listen, willing to take advice, willing to change, and willing to admit when they're wrong, when they've received some new information that says that their old information was incorrect. Listen to this school teacher's story. Every day of my life, teaching high school, I was the one who learned from my students. I'm never my best during the first period, so I initially did not do well with late students. One day I got upset with a student who came late. In talking to her, I learned that every morning she had to get all of her siblings up, dressed, and to school because her mother was not able to help. She taught me to be humble, ask questions, and most of all, not assume that students, children, don't care or don't want to be at school. I apologized to her in front of the class and thanked her for reminding me that compassion, communication, and listening are the most important parts of teaching. It changed my view of the people for whom I was responsible. Wow. That teacher expressed all the elements of humility. So how do you all handle criticism when it comes your way? It's tough, isn't it? But coming from a position of humility, I learned how to respond by watching Jesus and Ted Lasso. Throughout the show, the English fans are just ruthless in their critique of Ted Lasso, this American coach. They critique his folksy ways, his questionable tactics, and his obvious lack of knowledge about the game of soccer. The critiques are not surprising. What is surprising is his amazing response of grace and patience to those harsh criticisms. In one scene, Ted Lasso is walking down the street and he's met by a handful of fans who hang out at the local pub and they just blast him with obscenities. I wanted to show you the clip, but there was no way to bleep out all the F words. And so after they just bombarded him with the F bomb again and again, Ted Lasso's response was, "I appreciate your opinion and hope we'll have your support in the next game." Gosh. And then I tell myself, that's just a TV show. We're not really expected to live that way, are we? Yeah, maybe so. This is a scene that I can show you. It's not as harsh as the one that I just referred to. In this scene, Ted meets a fan, at least a fan of soccer. I'm kind of a fan of Ted Lasso as well. While Ted is on another walk, take a look at this. I mean, the young lady just, "You're rubbish." How do you respond to that? When you get a match, "You were rubbish." Play some soccer. What would it be like if we all responded with no defensiveness, no pushback, no retaliation? What would it be like if the leaders of our church, what if your pastor was like that? Wouldn't that be nice? Never happened. Cheers, Dennis. Like a piece of pie in the face. Exactly. If I was like that, if our church staff was like that, and I was better at it, I'm sure. What if our government leaders or political leaders were like that? Yeah. What if our bosses were like that? Our business leaders. But you know, as Christ followers, if we still want to be Christ followers, that is how we're supposed to be. When Jesus was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. You know, there's a misconception about humility that it means self-deprecation. In reality, I think humility is a superpower. It improves your overall well-being. It improves yourself. It enhances who you are. Everybody around you. Humility, I think, can be self-deprecating. Warren Buffett, the billionaire investor, was asked by a journalist about his reputation as being a cheapskate, never dressing very well. Warren Buffett said, "I buy expensive suits, they just look cheap on me." Yeah. Years ago, back in the late 80s, there was a freshman at the University of Colorado named Libby. She was first year taking a chemistry class. It was late at night, 11 o'clock p.m., and she was really struggling with this experiment. And she was getting so frustrated. A passerby heard her cuss at her chemistry equipment, and he stuck his head in and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" Libby, who was so very frustrated, asked, "Well, do you know anything about chemistry?" And the passerby said, "Yeah, a little." And for the next half hour or so, he helped her with the experiment. He helped her do the experiment. He helped her record the results of the experiment. And while they were working on this and for the end of the experiment and cleaning up everything, another passerby stuck his head in the doorway and said, "Dr. Chet, congratulations on winning the Nobel Prize." And the one that had stopped by to help her had just that week won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. Libby looked at her helper and recognized this was the Nobel Prize winner. He said, "So, you know a little about chemistry." And Dr. Chet blushed and said, "Yeah, no power is not as attractive as kindness. Here are some key characteristics that I'm trying to practice in my own life of humility. Humility is open to feedback. A humble person has the willingness to shift perspective in the face of new information. Humility is about curiosity, it's intentionality about learning new perspectives or new ways of doing things. A humble person is a person of gratitude, shows appreciation for people, situation, and things in one's life. A humble person is marked by generosity, giving to or supporting others, often from a place of gratitude. A humble person is just so thankful for everything. And so out of that gratitude is generous to express thanks to people and to organizations. A humble person is not afraid to ask for help, willingness to know what's one's weaknesses and need for help might be. A humble person is accountable to mistakes, for the mistakes. They're willing to own when they messed up. A humble person will practice forgiveness toward themselves and for others, understanding that we're all human. People are usually doing the very best that they can. And humble people have the self-awareness to recognize where they went wrong, often before they're even called out. And when they are called out, their first instinct is not to be defensive, but to seek to understand what happened and to take accountability for their part. So how do we do that? How do we develop that humble attitude? Well, if we make enough mistakes, maybe we will. Yeah. There are a couple of things I want to leave you with. To be humble, get grounded. Grounded in my humanity, grounded in the divinity that is within me, my connection to the divine. And then Paul says this. He prays, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts. The word dwell means to be at home with. It's you come into Denise's and my house and you're just feeling at home, and so you kick off your shoes and you put them on our ottoman and you help yourself to a drink. You're just at home there. So Paul prays that Christ may just be at home in our hearts and through our faith. Then he says, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I wonder if a proud person is not rooted and grounded in love. Maybe humility is a fruit that grows out of that root of love. And then Paul writes one of the classic scriptures on humility. Do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interest, but to the interest of others. And let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. And then Paul, the rest of that chapter, through verse 11, talks about how Jesus' humility was expressed through his death on the cross. Verse 5 was translated by one guy named William Barclay that I like so much. He says, think this very same thing in yourself that you think in Christ Jesus. So, when we're being criticized or whatever triggers us to be defensive and to be protective of our own ego, think about the old WWJD. What would Christ do? What does Christ feel? What is Christ's reaction? What are his thoughts? And think the thoughts of Christ in myself that I think Jesus is thinking. Yeah. How would Jesus respond? What would Jesus do? Verse 8 of that Philippians 2 passage, he humbled himself. And he's described in Matthew 11 and 29 as gentle and humble. The old King James Version that I grew up on translates that word lowly. Yeah. You know, the ancient Greeks and Romans in Jesus' day saw humility as a weakness. It was associated with failure and shame. And really, our culture is the same way. Can you imagine some of the candidates for president in this campaign season being described as humble and lowly? Yeah. We don't value that. We are more like the Romans and the Greeks of Jesus' day who saw that as weakness and failure. I'm afraid that we follow that culture more than we follow the culture of Christ. That's why it's so very hard to live according to the values of the kingdom of Christ in this kingdom of this world. Jesus' example of humility turned the common understanding of greatness upside down, both in his day and in our day. So my question is, whose example will we follow? The example of our politicians? The example of Jesus?